Welcome everyone to today's session on accounting in uncertain times. My name is Ann Dwyer. I'm a program manager with McMaster Continuing Education, and I'm very pleased to co-host today's session with two representatives from RPA Canada, and I'll introduce those gentlemen in just a moment. Before getting started, we do want to acknowledge that McMaster University recognizes that it is located on the traditional territories of the Mississauga and Haudenosaunee nations and within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. And now, again, I'm very pleased to co-host today's session with Umar Chaudhry and Mike Sanaga, who I will now turn things over to.
Yeah, thanks, Anne. Thank you again for having us here. Very relevant topic that I'm sure everyone is thinking of. My name is Umar Chaudhry. I am the Director of Education Outreach here at RPA Canada. Along with me is Michael Sanaga. He is the Director of Engagement and Learning Innovation at RPA Canada. Above those, we also both have years and years of experience dealing with various industries and clients. So, we've been handling calls from various clients and dealing with what's going on right now. So hopefully we can help. I thought I'd start off our webinar today with a quote, which I think tells a lot. So this is from the late Mr. Vladimir Lenin. There are decades when nothing happens and weeks when decades happen. And I can speak with for everyone here when even over the weekend, we've had a bunch of news coming in and things are changing super fast. Yeah, we had this presentation ready to go on Friday, and then some stuff happened on the weekend, so we had to change some more things. So again, things are changing lightning fast. You have to be on top of everything, and that's just as relevant kind of in the business world. So we'll talk a bit about how accountants can help, how RPA specifically have been geared to handle these crises. And how McMaster is also kind of getting in and making sure that everyone's up to date on their skill set and whatnot. So we can go to the next slide here, Ann. So exactly as I mentioned, we're in the new area of volatility, and this is the time for Canadian businesses to adapt. For the longest time, there's been a set model of how you're going to have your business, and it's been easy to kind of see the horizon for the next 5, 10, 20 years, and even into the exit. And that seems to have changed a lot just in the last year. Specifically with the tariffs, there's geopolitical things going on. And these are things that, whether we like it or not, it's something that hits close to home when it comes to business. We have to pretty much accept that the new normal is perpetual disruption. The only thing that we can know for sure is that things are going to change and things are going to change rapidly. What used to be done before in businesses was what we called static forecasting. And that was pretty much saying, hey, this is how we've done so far to date. Let's kind of, use the same variables and let's look into the future and see what's going to happen in the next couple years. But then, if we did that this year, we wouldn't have been able to predict tariffs or trade wars or ESG standards going in place. So that kind of gets thrown out the window now. And now what we're having is making sure that we're able to be agile when it comes to our business DNA, and making sure that we're not just prepping for the next 5, 10 years. We're prepping for the next 5 weeks or sometimes even the next 5 days. A term that I've started using, which I think is something that we should all kind of take home, is instead of forecasting, I call it nowcasting. So let's take a inventory of how our businesses are doing today, and see how we can make any agile changes for the next couple of days, just to make sure things are on top and things aren't going off the rails. And we'll talk about a couple of strategies as well later on in the presentation. What we came up with is kind of 3 of the top things that you need to focus on in business, whether it's your own business or for your clients or in your industry that you're in. So we'll get into that a little later. We can go to the next slide. So yeah, the main kind of volatility that we're seeing right now, as I mentioned, is trade wars, tariffs, supply chain shocks. Um, the simple one that we all know, kind of the elephant in the room, is the current tariff issue going on with our neighbors down south. It's not something that has ever been, it never came in the forefront for the last 30 years, um, until January 20th happened, and there's a new sheriff in town and some new changes coming in, um, and that changes everything. I know when I was studying, I was in a CMA program, a management accounting program, and they explained to us, usually the tariff section we just kind of gloss over because that's never a problem, but now we need to have a whole course and whole new training on how to, deal with tariffs and how to, put that into our forecasts and projections and make sure that that's all factored in. So that's something that has been huge. And, there's some main industries that are going to get affected. So transportation for sure, warehousing, construction. But then there's also the ancillary industries that are going to get hit with that. So, those supporting industries that support the main industries is what's going to hurt. Um, and that's pretty much to say that this impacts everyone. This isn't just going to hurt a few people. We're going to feel it all around. And some of us might have already started feeling the earthquake hit us, but it's something that we want to be on top of. Um, on top of that, we have some geopolitical stuff going on. If you saw over the weekend, so supply chain issues could trigger. You never know what could happen with oil and whatnot, and prices might shock or fluctuate. So we don't know. At the end of the day, um, the main thing is we don't know what's going to happen. And the idea is we really have to start preparing for the worst. We've also seen, I've had various clients that are working overseas and are multinational in Europe. They've been getting hit with ESG, environmental social governance requirements that they have to hit, which was never a thing in the past. And it's something that, if we're going to start diversifying our trading partners, we're going to have to be on the forefront of that and make sure that we're meeting all the standards that these other nations require us to hit, as someone who's working with them. Um, so that's kind of how we think accountants are going to come in play. It's really important to help them model out their second and third order effects, stay on top of those changes. And at the end of the day, what we always say is, our clients are not in the business of accounting. They're not in the business of this. They're in their business. And that's what they know. It's the accountant's job to explain to them what they need to focus on and what's important. So that's something where accountants are we need to make sure that we're upskilled and staying on top of all of these things. We can go to the next slide. And Mike, feel free to jump in whenever you like.
You're doing
Try to
great.
keep this important. Perfect. Happy to hear. Happy to hear.
Keep it clean.
Um,
Yep.
yeah. So we'll talk about some strategic responses to volatility. So there's a couple of core strategies that I think is important for everyone to take away from today. Um, First things first is going to be liquidity. So we'll talk a bit about, building your cash and managing cash and how that really is kind of, our main tool in situations such as those that we're in right now. The other one is going to be debt. So, being able to service those and managing rate changes and different time horizons of your business plans, making sure that debt is being managed. Also, market diversification. So making sure that, you know, we can't always look down south as the big whale. It might be time to kind of look into Europe, Africa, Middle East, Asia, and seeing what's out there and what markets our clients can get introduced to. And staying on top of trends, news and changes. Like I said, by the end of this webinar, if we all open our phones and check the news, who knows what's going to happen, right? So we really do need to be on top of the latest changes. And, it's kind of an unfortunate truth of the days that we're in is things are moving fast and one morning things could be going great for the business, and then by the end of the day, we're in a whole different situation. So staying on top of those. And I think the main word that I want to use for today is agility. So making sure that we have clients and businesses that are nimble in operations and able to, make those quick decisions and kind of, think on your feet. I think that's going to be the key to navigating through these choppy waters. So we'll talk a little bit of that and kind of some strategies to handle that.
Yeah, I
We
think
can,
just to add on to that, and I think we've seen a lot of our businesses doing that. You hear about a lot of the trends moving to other markets, pushing away from the volatility and the tariffs and whatnot. It's great, but it's great to be able to model off those companies that have been successful in being able to pivot and being nimble, like you mentioned in the slide.
exactly. Yeah, that's kind of going to be the key to getting out of this in one piece. So yeah, definitely an important thing. So we can go to the next slide, Ed. All right, so the first thing we'll talk about is liquidity. So cash is always going to be king. Um, you want to make sure you're building your cash or reserves. We talk about, tariffs and trade wars. You want to treat it as an actual war, and your greatest weapon is your cash. If you have the cash to withstand, you know, what's going on, you'll make it out. You'll make it out relatively unscathed. So that's kind of how you buffer against volatility. Um, Make sure that you're liquid, optimize the cash, try to kind of, you know, minimize some of your long-term investments if you have to. Just try to keep that large cash holding with you. You want to always help clients stress test liquidity. So, this is kind of what accountants do. We do scenario modeling, forecasting, nowcasting, as I mentioned before, helping leadership make those informed decisions. So, what I've had to do for the last, I'd say about 6 months, I deal with a lot of clients in the transportation industry. It's obviously an industry that's going to get hit very hard with what's going on in the news. And it comes down to we have to look at your numbers on a monthly basis and see how is our cash looking? Is it getting depleted? Is there any things that we can push over or hold off for the next little bit until things get a little more consistent? Um, so that's kind of where the accountant's going to come in. Uh, I talk a lot about how, you know, being a tax accountant and a lot of clients originally they'll come to you to do your taxes, get your financials just so you can file the taxes and they'll move on. But that's changing now. We're getting calls from clients about a myriad of different issues, different things. And if we're being honest, the main kind of driver of these is them asking, "Hey, do I have enough cash to seed this out? Can I pay myself? Can I pay my employees? Can I pay, our debt?" So those are the kind of questions that are coming up, and it's getting more and more important every day. We can go to the next slide. So with the cash, of course, is going to be managing debt. So this is another aspect of your business that we want to make sure that we're on top of. Banks are getting more and more stricter with the lending. Covenants are getting broken, and banks are watching those. And they're trying to weather the storm as much as we are too, right? So, what you want to do is make sure that you review all of your debt. There's rising interest rates. Sometimes they're going down, sometimes they're going up. And if you're in a variable situation, that'll hurt you and it's going to become a problem. So it's definitely something that we want to stay on top of. Restructuring is something that is worth looking into. So, we've had some situations where we've had clients that had great businesses and, they had their debt set up in a way where, they're going to retire in the next 5 years. But now with experiencing losses and uncertainty, maybe they have to stretch that, and maybe they have to stretch their loans as well. So that's something that you want to always look at. If you look at, hey, you have 5 years left on your loan, and this is how much you're paying. Hey, maybe how about we see if we can renegotiate this and stretch this to 10 or 15, just kind of lower the debt service that you have to deal with. And maybe we can help you weather the storm and use your cash instead of servicing debt at such a aggressive way to keeping things afloat and exploring those other options and making sure that you're staying nimble on your feet. So that's kind of what it is. The other option you want to look at is, am I on a variable or fixed? Should I switch? Should we lock something in? Before it used to be, even up until last year, the trend was, hey, interest rates are going down, so let's stick with variable. And now it looks like that's kind of paused for now. And who knows what could happen down the line. And you want to remind people, we've had a lot of clients that say, hey, interest rates are definitely coming down. At the end, we don't have a crystal ball. We don't know. Depending on how the news goes, things could change and interest rates might spike again. So you need to kind of temper your clients' expectations is another thing that I've thought of. And we want to make sure that things are being taken care of and we're on top of those things. So again, if we're talking about the accountant's role, do those models, do some projections, make sure that you have those conversations, those candid conversations with clients, and let them know, hey, this is the current structure you have. We think that if you can change some things around, you might be able to weather the storm a little better. And at the end of the day, it goes back to my first point about cash. Cash is what's going to get you out of this in one piece. So the more that you're able to use that cash for strategic means, the better you'll make it out. We can go to the next slide. So the other one is expanding into new markets. So this is another strategy that I've seen come up a lot. And we've probably all seen that as well, especially in the news with regards to, renewing or advancing relationships with Europe. At the end of the day, we can't, the old idea of, just send it down south or, send our goods down south and they'll buy it. It might not necessarily work anymore. And that's just a reality of the time. So what we got to do is what we should have done a long time ago, some might say, but better late than never. Diversify revenue streams and reduce some of our dependence on some of those old faithful markets that we've had. And sometimes it's even looking within domestic opportunities. So have we been servicing Canada enough? Resending everything just down south without thinking, hey, we have this big country that's growing, and can we service ourselves and maybe expand in that? And we're kind of seeing that the sentiment out there has been supporting Canadian businesses, which is a great sentiment, and I think it's something that kind of shows the resilience of the country. We're seeing the Buy Canada stickers everywhere you go in the grocery stores and whatnot. So that shows that there is a market in Canada, and Canadians do want to support Canadian businesses, and they're willing to change their habits, their consumer habits, if it means helping out a local business. So take advantage of that, and don't always look to the south. We've also, I've spoken with a couple of people. I was in a training program with Australian accountants. Australia is kind of, they're a similar country to us in population size. However, they have that advantage of, they're surrounded by dozens of countries, all with different cultures, different rules, different laws. So they're able to kind of navigate those trade waters pretty well. So learning from those who have done it before is another good thing. Speaking with people that have been there before, whether it means reaching out on LinkedIn or talking to people that who deal with trade in different markets. It's something that you want to kind of get out there and get a better understanding of. Again, when it comes down to expanding into new markets, there's going to be regulatory issues, tax, currency. So there's a lot of different moving parts when you're diversifying your market and going overseas. But at this point, what we found and what a lot of our clients have found is it's worth it at the end of the day, and the market's huge. Um, so one door shuts, another door opens. We have to kind of keep that mindset. One example I'll give of where we had to kind of help a client out is they were looking to go into Europe, sell some products in Europe. And they came back and found out that there's specific ESG reporting that they have to do. So environmental and social governance reporting that was required. And again, this is not something that we expect a client to know. It's more of on the accountant side to understand and know and be on top of. So again, when we have those conversations with clients, we want to let them know, hey, it's great that you can't just put your stuff on a ship to Spain and leave it at that. We gotta dot some I's and cross some T's. So that's something that you want to make sure that you're on top of. And again, it's risk management, right? It's unknown territory. We don't really know what's going to happen, but it's something that there's definitely opportunity there.
Yeah, I just to add to that, I've mentioned to clients and to students. I also teach, and one of the things I try to underline to these groups is that we shouldn't feel so bad. Any business analysis would suggest that US was, before January 20th, to your point, was the right decision or was a great place. It was, from a regulatory perspective, it was much more aligned with what we're used to here in Canada. Geographically, it's closer. We can use land. We don't have to get onto a boat or onto a plane necessarily. It made a lot of sense. But it's great that we've been able to sort of rally around buying Canadian, to your point. Each of the provincial governments has done a great job of working with the federal government to reduce interprovincial trade barriers. So I believe we're going to see more of that in the coming weeks and months, but all great things. However, there are a lot of landmines involved in this, and you need professionals who can help you navigate through this.
Exactly. And yeah, to your point, Mike, as I mentioned before, I think having that convenience of having the US just south of us, it made us a little complacent, and it probably was, worked well when it did, and when it stops working, it stops working. So
Yeah.
Got to look at don't let a crisis go to waste, I think is kind of how we want to look at it, right? And it looks like
Yeah.
Canadians have kind of joined together and have been doing it as a team. So happy to see that.
Yeah. I think the
Yeah.
one
So
thing
we can go
that
to the next slide.
the one thing that we would probably say in this is that if there was one critique, is that there was this over reliance on one market. And I know as a former auditor, we used to always kind of look at our clients if they had one or two clients that they were especially reliant upon. So as a country, I think we've learned from it, and I think we are in a new reality as we keep hearing on Threads and on Twitter.
Absolutely. Yeah, can't say it any better. So I mean, with those three items, so we've talked about preserving your cash, keeping cash king, keeping an eye on our debt service, making sure that we're on top of that, and diversifying new markets. So what I do think is all that kind of ties into being agile and keeping that agility in the business. And I truly do believe that's the word that's going to get us out of this, is all of those things kind of combine into agility. So when it comes to the expanding role of the accountant, as I mentioned, typically it was, hey, end of the year, here's my tax stuff, do my taxes, and I'll see you next year. And that's not what it is. We're getting calls, and people need advice. And the first person they're going to go to in situations like this is they're going to call their accountant and say, hey, what does this mean for my bottom line?
Yeah.
And you might not
Particularly for
always have.
small. Sorry, go
Oh
ahead.
yeah,
Go ahead. Sorry.
yeah.
I was
Well, I was
able to let you.
pretty much took the words out of my mouth, but yeah, particularly for small businesses, because um, that's kind of they're running their business and they just want to run their business. They don't want to deal with all these other things. Um, so that's kind of what you want to focus on is be that first point of contact when these things happen and have those answers ready. Um, it's very different. Each client's a little different. Clients got a bit more going on with them, but for the most part, if you just start with, what we've been doing in our firm is, we get a client a call from a client freaking out, and first thing we'll do is, hey, send us your numbers right now. Let's see what's going on. And the first thing we'll look at is their cash and their debt and what's going on there. If cash is running low, if they're in overdraft, it's a different conversation than if they have, some stuff in long-term or short-term deposits and whatnot, and they have cash available. Um, the other thing we want to look at is, hey, maybe you were thinking of expanding, getting some new warehousing or buying some new trucks or whatever it may be. Maybe this is the time to hold off on that and just work with what you have for now, and run a solid business. Um, what happens is, and something that I've seen a lot is, the panic button, right? People will, start burying the hatches and shutting down everything, and then in return, the services and the quality of their business goes down. So, to give you an example, say, in the trucking industry, um, we have clients that, there's two things that they can do. They can either buy a bunch of new trucks and take a bunch of debt, or buy no trucks and just stick with what they have. But then now they have aging equipment, more repairs and more problems. So you want to find that balance, right? You don't want to start cutting off your hand to spite yourself, and want to make sure that you're on top of that. So how can accountants help? Again, I've said this a couple of times. Scenario modeling is kind of what it is. Look at the numbers now, look at the assumptions, and see kind of what variables we can input, and give them a number and give them a realistic figure. And maybe do a best case, worst case of, hey, um, if things really hit the dirt, this is what you're looking at, and let's plan for this. But if things don't, let's hope for our best case scenario. So throw both of those out there, and have those conversations, I think, is the main thing. You don't want to ignore the problem. It's not going to go away. Try to, give them that financial clarity to the leadership. Let them know that, hey, be that confidant or that trusted advisor. The role of the accountant is more and more, and especially in the small business space, becoming an advisory role. So not so much of debits and credits, but more so, hey, analysis and valuations and whatnot. And I think
Sometimes,
Mike is pretty good at that.
sometimes psychotherapist, sometimes psychotherapist. You're absolutely right, Umar. Gone are the days of accountants sitting, number crunching in dark rooms, or sitting from afar and sort of looking in the rearview mirror. It's not just a compliance function anymore. Finance is a strategic enabler. And those who get this will have a definite advantage over their competition. And you're right, it's a data-driven world. Almost too much data, right? I think we all feel some days that we're drinking from the fire hose. And I think particularly where accountants can help, given that they are data centric, is that they can work through the data analytics, work through the disparate systems, embrace AI to help themselves and their clients achieve these insights, or dig into these numbers so that they can get insights. And it is a real skill, to be able to translate data into insight and ultimately simplify it so that owners and managers, or if you are the owner manager, to be able to understand what's going on and be able to act on it. And yeah, it's a really interesting time. to be in the world of finance. Everything is connected. As I mentioned to my students all the time, we could be in an economics course, and I'll be talking about strategy. I'll be talking about PESTEL analysis. If you guys remember PESTEL, the political, economic, social, technological, environmental, legal, when you do SWOT analysis, and all of these things have potential impacts on our finances. So it's going to be a really interesting time. One of the things that, as you were going through the last few slides, just reminded of this idea of continuous learning. And it's been a while since I've been at a school. I'll be honest. I know I don't look it, but it has been a while. But we were in this Australian course last week, and it reminded me of this stress test that we can use with our clients or with our own companies. The Altman Z-score, or we're in Canada, the Z-score, and how you can predict a company's. It's not obviously foolproof, but there's been a lot of research done on Altman Z-score and different sort of permutations to that that can help you better focus your operations team and your finance team to make sure that you don't become a statistic. I think there's a lot of we hear in the news there's companies closing or scaling back all the time, and a lot of people think about this time, this sort of time of uncertainty as a time where maybe we should be retrenching, as opposed to looking at it as an opportunity and leveraging our strengths to move forward aggressively, because I think there are some real opportunities, whether it be across Canada or around the world.
Exactly. Yeah, I think you hit it right on the head. There is a lot of opportunity. I mean, I think the title of our webinar and some of the stuff, it might come off as a little gloomy, but I think if there's anything we can take away from this is that there is a lot of opportunity out there, and there's a lot of opportunity to thrive and diversify, change your business, morph in, exit new markets, exit new products, enter new products. So there's a lot of different things going on. The way I like to look at it is it's business is exciting again. It's not the same old, hey, get into this business and run it for 25 years and you're off. It's you got to work for it, and it's fun. And what we've seen is a lot of our clients, they're entrepreneurial, and they kind of live and breathe for this. This is kind of forces them to be on their A game. So that's kind of where it is, and that's where you see kind of the cream rise to the top.
Yeah. And, one of the other trends we're seeing is that, over the last, I'll even say several decades, manufacturing has really fallen out of favor, other than, the big ones. And, we've seen a lot of consolidation and foreign ownership take over. But I think there's been a renewed appetite for local investment in manufacturing operations, where we can control the entire value chain from here, and looking at ways to maintain that ownership in Canada. I think there's some real great opportunities. We see it, that Project Arrow is a really interesting Canadian innovation. So if we could find another dozen Avro Arrows across the world, across the country, I think we'd be a much more resilient country for sure.
Absolutely. So we can go to the next slide, Anne. So I'll hand this over to Mike now, so he can talk a bit more. We've talked about some of the strategies we have and how accountants as a whole can kind of help out with these challenges. And I'll leave it to Mike to kind of talk about how RPAs are specifically getting ready for what's happening today.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Sumar. Great job working through that. Sorry for the interventions here and there. I just sitting on my hands here. I'm like, I want to talk. That's, but thank you for that. And I feel like I've got a special vantage point from this. I am an RPA. I'm also a CPA. Got to keep that thinking in my mind here. CPA as well. I've been working with RPA along with Umar and their board for, I guess, about 7 years, and seen a lot of change working with them. And one of the things that they've really focused on is the small to mid-size business, whether as an employee or as a service provider to that sector. And really, that is the meat and potatoes of our economy. We've got 98% plus of the businesses contributing 55-60% plus of the GDP, contributing 70% plus of the employment. This is a big, important sector, and traditionally underserviced, as we've seen. The larger of the SMB the sector is generally not too bad, but your owner manager type, or ones with under 25 employees, often see this as a nice to have rather than a must have. And one of the things that they don't skimp on is on their tax accounting and their yearly requirements, or perhaps quarterly if they're doing HST returns. RPA has really aligned itself to the SMB space, and has done a great job to upskill its own members to be able to help when they are in the trenches with their clients. So bringing a couple of examples here: management accounting, upskilling members. We're actually creating a specialization around management accounting, and we've partnered with CMA Australia, as Umar had alluded to. So really giving people top-notch education and skills to be able to bring to their clients, something that's actionable. ESG reporting. Umar talked about ESG. For those of you who are not familiar with this is environmental, social, and governance reporting. Generally, this has been reserved for large public companies, and the SEC has, kind of had this as a requirement for a little bit. But there are rumblings that ESG reporting could filter its way down to the small to mid-size sector or the private space. And I think this is a good thing. I think that there's a lot of benefit that can come out of this. That which gets measured gets managed. And if we know how we're doing on our global footprint, if we know how we are managing or working with our stakeholders, it's, when you think about social, it's really about stakeholders, whether they be internal or external. And then governance, how are we managing our operation, is really important. And part of that governance is in the social as well as the DEI leadership. One of the things that RPA has done is they're walking the talk by working directly with and empowering women entrepreneurs and accounting students. If anybody's available, in October we have our I can't remember what year it is, 6th Women Entrepreneurship Awards, I believe. Great event. So inspiring to hear the stories of these entrepreneurs. Nomination, the window is now open for nominations. So if you know any great female-led entrepreneurs, please put their names forward. The RPA community is also a very tight-knit group. They've got a lot of social media. They interact very closely day to day on social media. Gives you a great opportunity to work with other professionals to work through questions or problems you might be having. Great ability to sort of empower yourself to improve your ability to service your clients, improve the profitability or the performance of your own company. And then finally, one of the things that's very interesting with RPA was their full and complete embrace of technology. And artificial intelligence is one of those things that is a hot button for many, but there are great tools out there that we can be coaching our clients on to give them a leg up on their competition. So with that, I think RPA has done a great job. I think accountants in general play a massive role in the success or failure of a company, and it's our active leadership. I mentioned psychotherapist as one of them, but really it is advisor, coach, guide. I say psychotherapist mainly because we need to take a more objective role in this. We need to take the emotion out of the decision. It's so tough to we've been there. I know what it felt like to buy my first car or my first home or my third home. It didn't matter. There's that emotion there, and you're saying, I want that. Yeah, okay, that's great, but let's step back and look at this objectively. And I think that's a great place for accountants to play a role, particularly in this really emotionally charged time that we're living in. It just seems like it's bad news all the time. It's great to see. It's actually great to see some of the announcements coming out of Europe and the work that our federal government's doing to expand our partnerships around the world. But that doesn't completely overshadow the shadows that we see in the news. So keeping that level-headedness is a big part of what we do.
Thank you, Mike and Umar. It was a very insightful presentation, and yeah, certainly uncertain times ahead for sure. But I like the idea of looking at it as an opportunity, and there are opportunities. I do just want to mention McMaster Continuing Education. We offer accounting programs. We offer a diploma in accounting. We offer a certificate in advanced accounting. And our programming has been developed in partnership with our DeGroote School of Business. We offer university level courses and programming that has been mapped and designed in affiliation with the professional associations such as RPA and CPA. And our university level courses are taught by actual practitioners. So in our classes, you will see the RPAs and the CPAs actually teaching our courses. And we combine the theory that's expected at the university level curriculum with the more real world experience applied practical approach. So it's a real win-win situation. Just quickly, again, we do offer two types of programming or two credentials. We offer a diploma in accounting, which is open enrollment. All of our programming is open enrollment. That means you don't need to apply. You can actually just come in. If you just need one or two courses towards your RPA designation, you can certainly come in and take those courses so long as you meet the posted prerequisites. Or if you are inclined to complete a university credential, you can complete our diploma in accounting by completing a series of courses. You then graduate with an academic credential from McMaster University that can actually be laddered into an undergraduate degree. And also, again, courses are recognized by RPA and CPA respectively. For those who have accounting courses, if you've already studied at the post-secondary institution level, be that university or college, we have what we call our certificate in advanced accounting. So it's a shorter program. It comprises of 6 specialist or advanced classes. And again, often these courses are necessary towards if you are pursuing a professional designation, and they are recognized by the professional designations and associations, be that RPA or CPA, by way of example. In terms of formatting, we offer everything online. We offer 2 types of formats. We offer a virtual format, which is synchronous, live, real-time sessions. And those really replicate our in-person format, which we used to offer. We also offer online self-study, which is just that. It's self-study. So you kind of work at your own pace. based on an assignment and an actual schedule, but you're working at your own pace. You don't need to be online at any specified time, and you sit a final exam at the end of the course.
Yeah, thank you very much, Anne and Olivia. Appreciate your time. And, appreciate the opportunity to reach out and speak to the learners and to everybody on the call. Looks like we had a great group.
Yeah, so thank you again for those of you who signed into today's lunchtime webinar. We will have future ones, so stay tuned for those. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Umar. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Anne. Thanks. Thanks, everybody. Take care.